You're standing at the edge of a field that looks half-finished, as if the season forgot what it meant to be autumn. The light is soft, the air damp, and every sound feels swallowed by the fog drifting low across the grass. Ahead of you, across this pale sweep of Flemish farmland, you can almost hear the echo of hooves, cavalry moving at a trot, the last remnants of a war that still believed it could run. Before you drift off, take a moment, only if you want, to subscribe or tell us where you're listening from tonight. Sometimes a quiet connection is its own kind of shelter. You're listening to echoes of war. The year is 1914. The leaves are turning. The world is changing shape. You don't know it yet, but you're standing at the place where movement ends. At first the scene looks ordinary. Scattered farmhouses, trees trembling in the wind, fence posts leaning under their own age. But then something unfamiliar emerges, men digging shallow lines into the soil with a kind of urgent confusion. They use anything they can find, spades taken from wagon carts, entrenching tools borrowed from the French, bayonets pressed into the earth like crude chisels. Their breaths show in the morning air, brief bursts of white. The ground is stubborn, heavy with rain from the night before, but the men keep digging. You watch them pause to listen. In the distance, artillery rumbles like furniture being dragged across a floor. Closer, a horse whinnies, panicked, uncertain, smelling something on the wind. This isn't yet the war of trenches. Not officially. Not intentionally. Not in the way the world imagines it now, with its endless lines of mud and barbed wire. This is the moment before all of that begins. The moment when soldiers still believe they're only stopping for a night. A pause. A temporary line. A place to catch their breath. You stand with them in this quiet, watching the fog lift slowly, and you realize that no one here understands the size of the shadow forming beneath their feet. A cart rattles past, wheels sinking slightly into the damp soil. A Belgian farmer walks beside it, head down, pushing his last belongings away from a village already swallowed by smoke. His cowbell jingles softly, a strange, small sound that feels out of place in a landscape moving toward calamity. Buildings burn somewhere behind him, their flames muted by the fog, flickering like weak lanterns struggling against the dawn. You can smell the smoke before you see it. Would smoke, then something sharper, something metallic. The war is close now, close enough to taste in the air. A runner appears on the road, boots slapping the mud, carrying orders wrapped in oilcloth. He passes the digging men without stopping. His face is pale, his eyes wide. He knows, perhaps better than the rest, that the Germans are only a mile or two away, pushing hard, advancing through villages that fell too quickly to map. But still, the digging continues, not out of strategy, out of instinct, a place to hide when the shells come, a place to fire from, a place to survive. You crouch near the forming trench line and feel the damp earth under your hand, cold, sticky, smelling faintly of roots and iron. A soldier drops into the shallow ditch beside you with a thud. He looks around as if surprised by what he has just created. He wipes his brow with a sleeve already lined with mud. He doesn't know, how could he, that this crude groove in the earth will become a graveyard for millions, a world within a world, a landscape so fixed, so unchanging, that generations will think of this place whenever they hear the word trench. A burst of rifle fire cracks from somewhere in the distance. Then another. Then silence. The soldier flinches but keeps working. He has orders, and orders feel safe. You look down the length of the trench. It's barely more than a ditch. It zigzags awkwardly, shaped by indecision and the random logic of panic. Men are dropping in, adjusting their packs, checking their rifles. Someone drives a post into the mud. Someone else coils a strand of wire around a broken fence plank. Everything looks temporary, makeshift, hurried, yet something in the air tells you it won't be temporary at all. The fog begins to clear. The horizon sharpens. And for the first time, you see the German lines. Small figures. Moving. Digging. Mirroring. Across these fields, two armies, neither willing to retreat, neither able to advance, are building something neither planned, a stalemate carved into the skin of the earth. A shell lands far off with a bloom of dirt and smoke. Another follows, closer. The ground trembles. Birds rise from the tree-line in a frantic burst. The digging stops for a breath, then resumes faster, as if the earth isn't a place to shape, but a door that must be opened urgently. You stand beside them, feeling the cold settle deeper, the mud thicken, the air sharpen. You can sense the shift happening, quietly, invisibly, as the war rewrites itself. There's a strange stillness moving in, like an animal curling down for winter. You might wonder how long these men believe they'll stay here. A night, a week, perhaps a month at most. None imagine years. None imagine a line stretching from the North Sea to Switzerland. None imagine the sound the world will make when mobility dies. You breathe in the cold air and listen as the first true trench takes shape beneath your feet. It is crooked, crude, barely deep enough to hide in. But it marks the beginning of a new reality, a war that stops moving, a war that becomes a landscape, a war that sinks into the earth and refuses to rise. And as you watch, you feel the silence between artillery blasts growing heavier, thicker, as though the land itself is holding its breath before a long descent. Chapter 1. The Race to the Sea. You begin in the half-light of early October, when the mornings in Flanders feel heavy, as if the sky itself is tired of holding back the rain. You stand beside a narrow country road lined with poplars whose tops sway in a restless wind. The fields around you are pale and damp, marked by the wheels of fleeing carts and the deep prints of horses driven too hard for too long. The air carries two sounds that don't belong together: the distant thunder of artillery and the soft clatter of harness bells. Both sounds are moving north. Everything is moving north. You watch soldiers march past with the exhausted rhythm of men who have not slept in days. Their uniforms are dusty, their boots worn smooth, their steps automatic. Some carry spades, some rifles, some just the haunted expression of men who have seen a front line dissolve beneath them and reform again somewhere they never expected. This is the autumn of 1914, the final weeks of movement before the Western Front hardens into the shape the world will never forget. Historians call this desperate maneuvering the race to the sea, not because anyone intended to reach the ocean, but because each side tried to outflank the other, sliding northward like two great doors trying to shut on each other's hinges. What you witness now is the moment the sliding slows, the hinges strain, and the door frame of the Western Front begins to lock. The lines stretch and the landscape narrows. You can almost trace the invisible lines creeping across the map in your mind. To the south, battles have already raged across the Marne, the Aisne, the Somme. To the north, the shores of the Channel wait in a grey, uncertain calm. Between them lies a countryside that has not yet learned the vocabulary of trench war. The ditches here still belong to farmers, the fences still hold cattle when they can, and the barns still carry the smell of hay rather than smoke. But that innocence is already thinning, peeling away like old paint. Columns of infantry move along parallel roads. Cavalry scouts cut across fields in wide arcs, still imagining they can find an open flank somewhere. Supply wagons rattle and sway, their wheels thick with mud. Signals officers ride ahead, scanning the horizon for any sign of German formations drifting northward in the same desperate sweep. You stand at a crossroads listening to it unfold around you. A British officer spreads a map on the hood of an automobile. A French dispatch rider adjusts his goggles. A Belgian unit trudges past, heads down, rifles slung tiredly over their shoulders. The mood is not panic. Not yet. Just urgency and disbelief that the war is still running at this speed. Somewhere behind you, a church bell is ringing, not for service, but for warning. Civilians hurry down the road with belongings piled high, pushing handcarts, leading a cow or a goat, carrying infants wrapped in blankets. They pass the soldiers without speaking. They have begun to understand something the armies have not, that the war is not passing through Flanders. The war is coming to stay. Clashing before Ypres. The first true collisions happen near Langmark, Polkapelle, and the villages that crown the low ridges east of Ypres. Small places, quiet places, places whose names will soon be carved into stone tablets and spoken in hushed museum halls. You watch the British and French forces dig shallow firing lines in fields that only days earlier were striped with tractors and sheep paths. The Germans, advancing steadily, begin digging too. It is not yet the formal, ordered trench system that will grow here later, but the instinct is the same. Shelter from bullets, shelter from shells, shelter from the inevitable. The first shots echo across flat fields, startling crows into the air. Rifles crack in uneven rhythm, sharp, sudden, amateurish compared to what the war will become. Machine guns chatter in short, stuttering bursts. Artillery booms from the hills like the low growl of a waking animal. You watch a line of cavalry attempt one of the last open-field charges of the war. Their silhouettes are beautiful for a heartbeat. Men rising in saddles, sabers drawn, horses pounding toward the enemy's flank. Then machine gun fire ripples across the field like a zipper closing, and the charge dissolves in a confusion of falling shapes and churning hooves. It is over in seconds. The old world, too. You stand in the settling smoke, listening to the strange silence that follows. Not a peaceful silence. The silence of men realizing their tactics no longer belong to the age they inhabit. A line that refuses to move. Over the next days, the armies pull closer and closer to the edges of Ypres, a medieval town with narrow streets, tall spires, and proud brick facades. A town that still believes it has a future untouched by war. But all around its outskirts, trenches are beginning to form. You watch as British units, exhausted after weeks of marching and fighting, drive their spades into Flemish soil, carving shallow ditches behind hedges and farm walls. A French unit takes position along a drainage canal where cattails tremble in the cold wind. Belgian soldiers, wearing worn boots and patched coats, brace themselves along a line of willows near the Menin Road. The trenches are crude, improvised, and narrow. Soldiers slip and slide in them. The walls collapse. The bottoms fill with water. But they remain, because the alternative is worse. Above the trench lip, the world looks deceptively peaceful. Rolling farmland, low mists, gentle hills. But the fields are changing. Each shell hole, each dead horse, each shattered tree becomes part of the new geography of war. You watch engineers string the first lengths of barbed wire across the front. You hear hammering, sawing, shouting. You feel the cold of the earth rising through your boots. By the third week of October, the line is no longer temporary. It is becoming something fixed, something deeper than the soldiers realize. The race to the sea is ending, not because either side reached the water, but because both have exhausted the space in which they can move. The war is settling down, quieting, rooting itself in mud and fear and endurance. Ypres, the last open door. You stand on a low rise overlooking the town of Ypres. The cloth hall rises in the distance, its tall belfry etched against the grey sky. Smoke curls from chimneys, but there is a tremor in the air, an unease carried in the wind. The armies are converging here. Both sides know the town is the key to the Channel ports. Neither side intends to let it fall. From your vantage point, you watch two immense forces stiffen like opposing tides meeting at a shoreline. There is no more room to outflank. No more room to race north. No more room to maneuver. Only room to dig. Room to endure. Room to wait. A future of trenches is forming beneath your feet, quietly, drop by drop, shovel by shovel. The race to the sea is over, and the stillness that follows will change the world. Chapter 2. Digging because there is no other choice. It begins with a sound that doesn't belong to the landscape. Metal striking earth. Not the ringing strike of a blacksmith's hammer, not the crisp cut of a farmer's spade, but something heavier, more desperate. Iron blades hacking into soaked Flemish soil with the rhythm of fear. You stand at the edge of a beat field south of Ypres and listen as dozens of men dig in hurried, uneven strokes. Their boots sink ankle-deep in mud with every step. The ground, saturated from weeks of autumn rain, pulls at their ankles like a living thing that doesn't want to let them go. They dig because orders told them to. They dig because shells have begun to fall with increasing regularity. They dig because there is no other choice. This is how trenches begin, not with strategy, but with instinct. The first cuts in the earth. You watch a British infantryman, his uniform still dusty from the march north, stab his entrenching tool into the soil and drag out a heavy clump of mud. He works with his shoulders, not his arms, putting his entire weight behind each strike. His breath shows in the cold air. His hands shake from exhaustion, not cold. Beside him, a French soldier uses a long-handled spade taken from a farm shed. He has tied his coat open at the chest, steam rising from his damp shirt. His face is streaked with the kind of mud that never seems to dry. A Belgian sergeant paces behind them, pointing to the faint white chalk markings on the ground that indicate where the trench line should go. But the markings already look meaningless. The men are digging where the soil seems weakest, where the shell holes offer natural cover, where instinct tells them to drop. The first trenches of Ypres are not straight. They are not tidy. They do not resemble the precise zigzag patterns that will come later. They look like panic carved into the earth. Shallow, crooked, collapsing under their own weight. Every few minutes a distant shell lands somewhere to the east. The earth jumps. Soil showers down from the half-dug walls. The men pause, glance at one another, and resume their digging. You feel the rhythm of it. The scrape, the heave, the quiet grunt. The thud of mud hitting mud. This is the heartbeat of a new kind of war. The ground fights back. Flemish soil is not kind to shovels. It is soft near the surface, then suddenly dense, heavy, clay-like. It clings to metal with a stubborn grip, forcing men to kick their spades clean every few minutes. When struck hard, it vibrates up the handle into their bones. When wet, it swallows boots whole. You watch a young private, no more than 19, lose his balance as his boot becomes trapped. He falls forward into the half-dug trench with a splash of cold mud. The men nearby laugh, but it's a humor born not from joy, but disbelief that this will be their life now. He pulls himself up, wipes his sleeve across his face, and keeps digging. A corporal drops wooden planks along the trench edges to keep them from collapsing. They sink halfway into the muck within minutes. Another man tries to wedge branches and broken fence rails into the walls, but the earth absorbs them like a slow, hungry tide. The trenches sag, then slide, then fill with water. Men bail with helmets, with ration tins, with anything that holds more than a handful. A captain shouts encouragement, but his voice is hoarse, as if he knows that no amount of shouting can turn mud into something willing to cooperate. A small grove of trees nearby still holds its leaves. You watch a pair of engineers hack down 3 slender trunks and drag them across the field. The wood is wet. Too wet. They lay it across the trench bottom anyway. It sinks instantly, disappearing beneath the sucking mud. Someone mutters that the earth is eating everything. He's not wrong. A line forms out of chaos. By late afternoon, the trenches begin to take shape, not because the men have mastered the work, but because they have no energy left to keep fighting the ground. What stands before them is a line only in the loosest sense. An uneven ditch, shallow in one place, waist deep in another, slanted, slumping, wet. You walk along its lip, careful not to send loose soil sliding down onto the men below. The trench curves around a small farm where chickens scatter nervously, sensing the tension in the air. On the other side of a low wall, a mule stands trembling, reins dragging in the dirt. Its ears flick with every shell burst. Further down the line, a group of Belgian soldiers clear a length of hedgerow and begin reinforcing their section with woven branches. French troops at the connecting point hammer shovel handles into the trench wall to create makeshift steps. British engineers run lengths of barbed wire, taken from nearby cattle pastures, across the open ground in front. None of this looks organized. None of it follows doctrine. This is improvisation, desperation, survival. But slowly, unmistakably, a defensive line is forming. You notice something else. The digging is quieter now, not because the men are talking less, but because they've begun to understand that this line might not be temporary, that they might sleep in this ditch tonight, and tomorrow, and the day after that. The frantic energy of morning has turned into the heavy, resigned motions of acceptance. Fire finds the trenches. In the late afternoon, the first German shells fall close enough to send mud flying into the trenches. Men duck instinctively, hands over their heads. The earth shakes. Dirt rains down like gritty rain. When the noise fades, a medic calls out for anyone wounded. No one answers. But the next shell lands closer, and the next is closer still. And suddenly the digging takes on a new urgency, not rushed, not panicked, just focused. The men understand, with a clarity only artillery can give, that depth is survival. You dig, or you die. The phrase is muttered down the line, passed from man to man. Half a joke, half a prayer. You watch as shovels bite deeper. Mud piles higher. The trench grows in height, in shape, in purpose. Riflemen stand watch at the forward lip, firing occasional shots at shapes they can barely see through the fog. Engineers stretch a second line of wire. Officers kneel in the mud to study maps, their compasses trembling with every distant explosion. The trenches are no longer just ditches. They are becoming positions, shelter, cover, the first true bones of the Ypres salient. Night falls and the earth breathes cold. When evening comes, it comes fast. Clouds swallow the last of the light. Frost creeps along the edges of puddles. Men wrap scarves over their mouths, breath rising in quiet plumes. You move along the length of the trenches as the soldiers settle into their first night inside them. Some sit with their backs against the sloping walls, rifles resting across their knees. Others hunch over small tins of cold rations, hardtack softened with water, slices of bully beef, whatever they carried from the last supply stop. A lantern glows faintly in one dugout, lighting the faces of men writing quick letters home. The paper trembles in their hands, not from fear necessarily, but from tiredness so deep it feels woven into their bones. Somewhere down the line, someone starts humming a tune. It spreads softly, then fades. The cold steals its strength. A flare rises from the German lines, casting everything in a pale white glow. The barbed wire, the churned mud, the trembling shadows of men pressed close to the earth. For a moment, the world looks frozen, still, almost peaceful in its starkness. Then the flare dies, and the darkness rushes back in. You feel the weight of it settle over the trenches, a darkness that doesn't just cover, but defines. This is what digging looks like at the birth of trench warfare. Not strategy, but necessity. Not planning, but survival. Not the start of something, but the end of something else. The end of movement. The end of clarity. The end of open war. The men don't know it yet, but they have just dug the outline of a future they cannot imagine. Years spent in mud, months spent under fire, nights filled with flares and whispers and the steady, suffocating rhythm of a war that refuses to end. Tonight, they only know the cold, the mud, the weight of the earth pressing back. And still, they dig, because there is no other choice. Chapter 3. A New Shape of War. The morning begins with a stillness that feels unnatural, as if the land itself is holding its breath. You stand beside the trench line that took shape through the long, cold night, awkward, uneven, half-collapsed in places, yet undeniably there. A boundary where none existed before. A mark in the earth that says, "No farther." The fog lies low over the fields. The soil is dark and heavy, glistening with frost. Men emerge from the trenches one by one, faces pale, uniforms stiff with dried mud, movements sluggish after too few hours of broken sleep. Their boots make a soft sucking sound as they climb out of the trench and back into it again, testing the depth, testing the walls, learning how to live inside the shape they carved under duress. Something about the scene feels unfamiliar, not chaotic, not panicked, but undeniably changed. The war is rearranging itself in front of you. The trench becomes a world. You watch soldiers adjust their positions as the sun lifts slowly through the mist. Riflemen take their places along the forward parapet, their bayonets catching pale light. Others reinforce the walls with planks scavenged from ruined barns. One man drags a broken wagon wheel and wedges it against the trench wall to act as a support post. Another uses a fallen fence rail as a brace. Improvised, imperfect, but useful. The trench is becoming a world, shallow and unstable, but a world with rules, and habits, and routines. Someone marks firing steps where the trench floor is deepest. Another man uses a pocket knife to carve a small alcove for storing ammunition. A pair of soldiers scrape mud from the bottom with mess tins, trying to keep the water level below their ankles. The actions are small, repetitive, instinctive, but each gesture adds a little more permanence. A German shell lands 2 fields away with a shuddering blast. The men don't flinch the way they did yesterday. They pause, listen, then continue reinforcing the trench. This is the first sign that something fundamental has changed. Movement is no longer the defining rhythm of this war. Digging is. from ditch to fortress. The trench line stretches across fields and farm roads like a scar, irregular, slanted, partially hidden by hedgerows and broken fences. Engineers begin repairing the weakest sections. They shove sandbags into sagging walls. They reinforce the firing line with hastily nailed wooden planks. They carve shallow alcoves into the trench face for shelter. None of it follows a blueprint. None is part of a grand plan. But the effect is unmistakable. The trench is slowly becoming a fortress, not in the medieval sense, but in the modern one, a place where men can survive artillery long enough to fight back. Farther down the line, you see the first communication trenches being cut, narrow, winding paths that dip and twist away from the front. They look like thin rivers of mud leading into the distance. These new trenches will connect the front to the rear, allowing messages, ammunition, and the wounded to move with some measure of safety. A British lieutenant walks the length of the line with a notebook. He sketches rough outlines of the trench, marks where improvements are needed, and pauses occasionally to speak with the men. His voice is quiet but steady. He knows they are creating something that will shape the entire war. You feel it too. A new structure is forming, not just in the earth, but in the minds of the men who stand in it. The first dugouts. By midday, the engineers begin carving small dugouts into the trench wall. These are nothing more than hollowed-out pockets supported by branches and whatever boards can be scavenged. Crude shelter from rain and wind. Not nearly deep enough to stop a shell, but places to rest, places to write, places to crouch during barrages. You watch a group of soldiers scooping mud out with their helmets, forming one such dugout just large enough for two men to sit with their knees nearly touching their chests. One soldier wedges a plank across the opening to keep loose dirt from collapsing in. Another places a small lantern on the ground inside and tests its light. The dugout glows like a tiny ember in the gloom, a fragile promise of shelter, in a world becoming increasingly hostile. Nearby, a French unit is constructing something slightly sturdier, using timber pulled from the beams of a half-collapsed farmhouse. The wood snaps with brittle cracks as it's forced into place. A corporal instructs the men to line the roof with dirt for extra protection. It won't stop a shell, but it might stop shrapnel. A Belgian soldier mutters, "It's a coffin with a door." No one disagrees, but no one stops digging. Dugouts are more than shelter. They are acknowledgement, a sign that the men expect to be here tomorrow, and the day after that, and perhaps far longer. The war is settling deeper. Wire rises like a thorny horizon. On the open ground ahead of the trenches, barbed wire begins to appear, slowly at first, then in long, jagged stretches. You watch engineers unroll coils of it, stretching them between wooden stakes jammed into the mud. The wire gleams faintly in the weak sunlight, each barb a tiny spark. They position it in uneven patterns, sometimes in a straight line, sometimes in a triangular configuration meant to confuse and slow attackers. The men work quickly, with gloved hands, cursing as the barbs catch their sleeves and tear at their coats. Behind them, machine gun crews take up their positions. They set their tripods, align their sights across shallow fields, and test their belts of ammunition. The sound of the metallic click-click-click as they feed the rounds through the mechanism becomes part of the new soundscape of the front. This combination, trench plus wire plus machine gun, is the new shape of war. Not a temporary measure, a system, a geometry designed for stalemate. The men don't use that word, not yet, but you can feel it taking root. Every piece of wire hammered into the soil, is a nail sealing the coffin of the old war, the war of cavalry and open fields. The realization settles in. By late afternoon, the sky darkens again. A light rain begins to fall, steady, cold, relentless. It pools in the low places of the trench. It trickles down the walls. It soaks the sandbags until they sag and slump. The men try to cover their dugouts with tarps, coats, or anything waterproof they can find. The trench floor becomes a shallow river of brown water. Every step produces a quiet slosh. And still they keep working, because the truth has become unmistakable. This trench is not temporary. This is the war now. You watch it dawn on their faces, not dramatically, but slowly, subtly, like a shadow sliding across the ground. A kind of resignation mixed with determination. The fear of the unknown replaced by the fear of the inevitable. They will defend this line. They will live on this line. They will die on this line. Not because they chose it, but because the war has chosen it for them. Night finds the new war waiting. As evening falls, the last light of day catches the shape of the trench from above. If you squint, the line almost looks like a dark river cutting through the fields, crooked, glistening, defined. A scar that wasn't there yesterday. From your vantage point, you can hear the sounds of a war transforming, the thump of engineers driving in stakes, the suck of boots in mud, the low murmur of officers discussing firing arcs, the clinking of rifles being cleaned, the metallic sigh of machine gun belts, the restless shuffle of men settling behind the parapet. A German flare rises, illuminating the entire landscape in harsh white light. For a brief second, you see it clearly. The trenches on both sides, mirroring each other, parallel scars on the same wounded earth. The flare fades. Darkness returns. But the shape remains in your mind. A new kind of war is here. Not fast. Not mobile. Not clean. A war of earth and endurance. A war of inches and hours. A war that survives not through movement, but through staying. You listen to the men mutter about tomorrow's work. Deeper trenches. Better firing steps. New wire. More timber. Proper dugouts. Latrine pits. Drainage channels. They are planning for a future they didn't know existed yesterday. That is the greatest shift of all. The quiet moment when soldiers stop preparing to move and begin preparing to stay. The trenches of Ypres are no longer ditches. They are no longer improvised. They are no longer temporary. They are becoming the architecture of the war itself. A new shape of war. Chapter 4. The salient takes shape. By the time dawn creeps across the fields again, the truth is impossible to ignore. The front line around Ypres has bent, curved, and settled into a shape the men do not yet have a word for. From above, if you could rise like one of the crows drifting over the rooftops, you would see it clearly. A bulge in the line, a pocket of ground protruding into enemy territory. A vulnerable shape. An exposed shape. A shape that will define everything that happens here for the next 4 years. You are watching the birth of the Ypres salient. It doesn't look dramatic from the mud. It looks like men shivering in shallow trenches, like wire half sunk in puddles, like ruined farmhouses filled with the smell of cold smoke. But the line is taking form, not through intention, but through collision. And once a line settles, it rarely lifts again. A bend becomes a bulge. You stand at a crossroads just south of the town, listening as officers gather around a damp map pinned to a wooden crate. Their fingers trace the front line, following its unnatural curve. The more they look, the more troubled they become. The line should be straight, or at least steady. Instead, it pushes outward, a swollen arc facing the enemy. British units hold the left flank. French troops hold the right. Belgian forces anchor the center near the Ypres Canal. Each army is clinging to a piece of ground too important to abandon, and too difficult to reinforce. The result is a shape that attracts fire like a magnet attracts iron. Inside the bulge are low ridges, key roads, and the approaches to the channel ports. Outside it are German forces pressing in from three sides. You watch the officers exchange glances, the kind that speak of hard math, not courage. A salient is easy to draw. It is much harder to defend. Ypres at the center of the storm. The town of Ypres, still mostly intact, is the heart of the salient. You make your way toward its center, passing through narrow streets lined with red brick houses whose windows rattle with every distant artillery blast. The cloth hall rises above everything, its tall belfry pointing into a gray, uneasy sky. Merchants once gathered beneath its arches. Cloth traders once crossed these squares. Now soldiers march through them with mud on their boots and rifles slung across their backs. Civilians peer from cellar windows, eyes tired, faces pale, hands gripping the edges of blankets wrapped around their shoulders. They have begun to understand that they live inside the storm's eye. Not outside it, not beside it, inside. You watch a Belgian father lead two small children across a square, their feet splashing through puddles. Their mother carries a suitcase that looks too light to hold a family's life. They move quickly, pressed tight together, trying not to look at the soldiers reinforcing sandbags around the town hall. War has not destroyed Ypres yet, but it has claimed it. The ridges that matter too much. You climb a slight rise east of the town, nothing dramatic, just a gentle swell in the landscape. But from here, everything becomes clear. Ypres sits in a shallow basin. Around it rise a series of low ridges. Pilcombe Ridge, Galuvelt Plateau, Polygon Wood, Messines Ridge. They are barely hills by the standards of other battlefields. But in the flatlands of Flanders, elevations of meters feel like mountains. If the Germans hold the ridges, they look down into the town, the trenches, the roads, the supply lines. That is why the Allies refuse to pull back. That is why they cling to every soggy inch. That is why the line has swollen outward into a dangerous curve. You can almost feel the tension between geography and necessity, the weight of a landscape dictating decisions. The salient is not an accident. It is the consequence of topography, of fear, of pride, of what must be held, and what cannot be lost. A ring of fire begins to close. As the morning progresses, artillery begins to fall in a slow, methodical pattern around the edge of the salient. The Germans are testing the shape, probing for weaknesses. You stand in a forward trench as shells burst across a distant field in walking barrages. Each explosion a step closer, each plume of dirt a punctuation mark. The men watch in silence, not fearful, not brave, just calculating. A salient has no single front. It has three. Everywhere the horizon looks hostile. Every direction feels threatened. And every man knows that retreat means losing Ypres. And losing Ypres means losing the way to the sea. A British corporal murmurs, "We're standing on a knife's edge." A French soldier beside him replies, "None. We're standing in a bowl." Both are right. You feel the geometry of the battlefield settling into place. A ring tightening, a shape forming, a fate locking. Improvisation becomes infrastructure. Throughout the day, the trenches begin to evolve. Yesterday's crude ditch becomes today's defensive line. Engineers reinforce the walls with timber scavenged from ruined barns. Belgian workers raise wooden walkways, duckboards, to keep feet out of the worst mud. French sappers carve deeper communication trenches, winding like veins into the interior of the salient. British units lay new coils of barbed wire in dense, chaotic knots. The trench network is becoming a labyrinth, messy, imperfect, but undeniably more permanent. You pass a group of soldiers digging sump pits for drainage. Another group builds a forward observation post in the remains of a windmill. A medic organizes a makeshift dressing station in a farm cellar. A signaller runs cable through a trench, muttering about rats. This is no longer improvisation. It is infrastructure, the infrastructure of staying put. The men don't dug trenches to win ground. They dig to survive holding it. That is the truth that changes everything. The first sense of surrounding. As dusk falls, the fog thickens and the temperature drops. The fields around Ypres grow quiet, too quiet. You stand on the fire step of a trench near the Menin Road, watching shadows move in the fog. A German flare rises. For a moment, the entire landscape glows ghost white. In that harsh light, you see the shape of the salient as if drawn on the earth. Allied trenches forming a rough arc. German trenches curving around them. The two lines so close in places that you could shout across the gap. The flare dies. Darkness returns. But the image remains in your mind. A shape that shouldn't exist. A wound that refuses to close. The men in the trenches feel it too. The sense of being half surrounded. The sense of danger coming from too many directions. The sense of a pressure building that cannot be relieved. But there is no thought of retreat. The ridges must be held. Ypres must be held. The salient must stand, even if it costs everything. Night deepens the shape. Night in the salient is not simply darkness. It is a presence. You walk through communication trenches lit only by the faint glow of shielded lanterns. The mud sucks at your boots. The walls glisten. Occasionally you hear the buzz of a bullet overhead, passing through fog with a sound like an angry insect. Men huddle in dugouts, blankets pulled to their chins, listening to distant shellfire. Others clean rifles with careful, methodical motions. A few try to sleep, their breaths shallow and uneven. From somewhere in the dark comes the smell of wood smoke. From somewhere else, the distant mutter of voices in German. The salient feels alive in the night. A breathing thing. Nervous. Cornered. You stand on a slight rise and look toward the horizon. 3 fronts. 3 directions. 3 threats. And in the middle, Ypres glows faintly as oil lamps flicker behind boarded windows. The salient is becoming a fortress. But it is also becoming a trap. This duality will define every battle fought here. It will shape the lives of men who will come to call this place home, and those who will never leave it. Tonight, though, the shape is still forming, still settling, still deciding what kind of war it will hold. You listen as the first rain of evening begins to fall on barbed wire. A light tapping at first, then a steady, cold drumming, and you understand with quiet certainty. The salient will endure. It will suffer. It will become legend. And it is only just beginning. Chapter 5. First Frosts, First Corpses. The first frost arrives quietly, almost delicately, as though unaware of the place it has chosen to settle. You notice it at dawn, a thin, white skin clinging to the edges of puddles, glimmering faintly on coils of barbed wire, turning sodden sandbags stiff and pale. It lies over the fields like a veil, softening the broken fences, the churned mud, the splintered beams of ruined farms. For a moment, the landscape almost looks peaceful, but frost is a kind of truth-teller. It reveals what the mud has hidden. It sharpens what the rain has softened. It preserves what should have decayed. And in the trenches around Ypres, it brings the first unmistakable sign that this war will be fought in cold. Not for days. For seasons. The cold learns the shape of men. You stand in the early morning quiet, watching men wake beneath a sky the color of old tin. Their breath rises in faint white threads. Their uniforms, already stiff with dried mud, now crackle at the seams where the frost has kissed them. Buttons feel colder. Metal bites skin. The barrels of rifles steam weakly as they are unwrapped from damp cloths. One private rubs his hands together, trying to coax warmth back into fingers that look more like the hands of an old man than someone barely 20. Another soldier flexes his feet inside boots that froze overnight and now cling to his toes like iron cages. Water bottles are slushy. Mess tins rattle with a faint crust of ice. The trench floor is hard enough to scrape knuckles if someone stumbles. The cold finds everything. And everyone. You watch a corporal press his palm against the trench wall. The mud feels strange now, firm on the surface, soft underneath, like flesh cooling after heat. He draws his hand back quickly, as if the wall has rejected him. Winter's coming early, someone mutters. But this isn't winter. This is the warning. The first dead revealed. As the sun lifts, weak and distant, the frost begins to melt into a thin sheen. What lies beneath becomes visible. A horse, long dead and half buried in the mud, glistens with a crust of ice along its mane. Its eyes, clouded and sunken, reflect the pale light like two fragments of broken glass. Steam rises from its exposed ribs where scavengers have torn the flesh. Near a shattered wagon, a German infantryman lies twisted beside the wheel. His uniform is stiff, his hands frozen around the strap of his pack. A light dusting of frost clings to his eyebrows. He looks almost peaceful, but the ground beneath him tells the truth. He fell where he crawled, alone, in the dark. A British soldier notices him. He stops, staring for a moment, then pulls his scarf higher around his face and keeps walking. There is no gloating, no hate, just a quiet acknowledgement, a kind of nod between strangers who never met in life, but share the same end. Further down the line, a pair of stretcher-bearers attempt to retrieve a fallen comrade who collapsed near the wire during the night. His coat is rigid, his fingers curled into the mud. They lift him as gently as they can, but the cold has claimed him so completely that the body moves like a single frozen weight. One of the bearers whispers, "He was alive when the watch changed." The other only nods. You feel the heaviness of it settle into the trench. Not fear, not even sorrow, just the resigned understanding. That cold can kill as efficiently as bullets. The frost is not just weather. It is the first enemy that does not sleep. The body learns the cost of mud. As mid-morning arrives, the frost softens and the mud returns. Thicker, heavier, colder. You watch soldiers pull their boots free from the mire with a sucking sound that echoes along the trench like slow applause. The mud is darker now, almost black, and it grips ankles with renewed force. A sergeant demonstrates how to stamp feet every hour to keep feeling in the toes. He jokes about the absurdity of it, that the greatest danger some days is not machine gun fire, but the slow seep of cold water through wool socks. Trench foot whispers its first threats. You see a soldier lift his booted foot onto a duckboard and unwrap the sodden cloth inside. The skin beneath is pale, wrinkled, tender. He presses a finger against it and winces. "It'll get worse," the medic tells him quietly. "Keep them dry if you can." But dry is a myth here, a rumor carried from another world. The mud is a presence, not a thing you stand in, but a thing that lives with you, presses into you, absorbs your sweat, your blood, your footsteps. The frost only makes it hungrier. Letters in the cold. You watch a group of soldiers gather near a dugout entrance to open letters delivered overnight. Their hands shake too much to unfold the envelopes properly. The paper tears. Ink has run where condensation soaked through the corner of one. A man in his 30s holds a letter from his wife, smoothing the wrinkles carefully as though touching her cheek through the page. His breath fogs the words. He wipes the surface with his thumb, but the moisture returns instantly. Another man reads a letter twice, folds it, presses it to his lips, and tucks it inside the lining of his coat for warmth. The cold makes everything fragile. The air, the earth, even the letters that tether these men to the world beyond the trenches. Above the dugout, a faint wind rattles coils of barbed wire, producing a thin metallic chime. It sounds almost like a distant church bell, faint, off-key, but oddly soothing. For a moment, the men listen. Then the moment passes. The cold reasserts itself. The enemy in the frost. Midday brings a brief lull in shelling. The fog lifts just enough for soldiers to peer across no man's land. What they see is a mirror of their own suffering. The German trenches glisten with the same sheen of frost. Figures move slowly along the parapet, coats pulled tight, rifles slung low. Smoke from their cook fires drifts upward in thin, trembling lines. For a moment, just a moment, the distance between enemies does not feel like hatred. It feels like shared endurance. You watch a British sniper lower his rifle and study the horizon instead. His breath curls from his mouth in thin spirals. He wipes frost from the scope with a cloth and rests his cheek on the cold wood of the stock. He is not looking for a target now. He is measuring the day, judging the wind, waiting for orders that may not come. Across the lines, a German soldier does the same. The frost makes everyone slower, quieter, more careful. The cold draws a thin thread of understanding between men who will never meet, never speak, never know each other's names, but who kneel beside the same merciless weather. Death in quiet forms. As afternoon darkens toward evening, the temperature drops swiftly again. A brittle silence settles over the fields. You walk with a ration party moving supplies along a communication trench. Their breaths come in short white bursts. They carry boxes of hardtack, tea, tins of bully beef. The trench narrows in places where walls have slumped under the weight of frost. They squeeze through, passing items hand to hand. Midway through the trench, they find a man slumped against the wall. At first they think he is sleeping. Then someone touches his shoulder. The body is stiff, the face pale, the eyes closed, lashes rimmed with frost. "He must have sat down to rest," one soldier whispers. "Didn't wake up." They lift him carefully, respectfully, and carry him toward the rear. No one speaks loudly. No one curses the cold. No one asks for details. There is no drama in this kind of death. No burst of fire. No shout. No cry. Just a quiet surrender to exhaustion, to cold, to the unrelenting demands of trench life. The first corpses have arrived, and they will not be the last. Night and the hard truth. Night returns earlier now. By 5 o'clock, the fields are already dim. By 6, darkness presses against the trenches like a heavy, cold wall. You stand on the fire step as the frost thickens once again. The wire sparkles faintly in the moonlight. The mud stiffens underfoot. Somewhere down the line, a lantern glows inside a dugout, barely illuminating the doorway. The air is painfully cold, the kind that stings the nostrils, burns the throat, makes breath feel like smoke. And then, slowly, the truth settles in. The men must work through the night. The trench still collapses. The walls still crumble. The dugouts still leak. The wire still needs repairing. They climb out in pairs, spades in hand, breath white and visible, silhouettes moving like ghosts in the half-light. You watch them work under the glow of distant flares, hands numb, faces grey, movements automatic. Death is no longer loud here. It is slow, silent, cold. The first frost has laid bare the reality that this war demands not just bravery, but endurance. Not just courage, but patience. Not just strength, but the ability to keep breathing. In a world that freezes your breath before it leaves your lips, the first frost is more than weather. It is a threshold, the beginning of a season that will reshape the land, the men, the war itself, and the first corpses lying still beside the wire are only the earliest shadows of what Ypres will become. Chapter 6. Nights filled with flares. Night descends over the Ypres salient not as a gentle curtain, but as something heavier, a lid placed over a simmering pot. The last streaks of twilight fade quickly, swallowed by low clouds and drifting smoke. The cold returns, biting, familiar, and then the flares begin. It always starts with a single rising star of white light, a thin arc shot from the German lines, lifting silently at first, then hissing as it reaches its peak. You watch it bloom into brilliance overhead, spreading its harsh radiance across no man's land. Bleaching mud, wire, corpses, craters, turning the world silver and stark. In this light, nothing can hide. The world in false daylight. The flare hangs suspended, its parachute drifting lazily, casting long, trembling shadows of men pressed low in the trenches. Every face looks ghostly in its glow. Every movement becomes deliberate, cautious. You feel the shift in the air, a tightening, a breath held, a moment stretched to breaking. Men freeze on the fire step, rifles ready. Machine gun crews hold their bolts open, waiting for silhouettes to appear. A sentry whispers, "Hold still," though no one needed the reminder. Under flare light, The landscape becomes a theatre, every ridge a stage, every shell hole a pit, every piece of wire a clawed silhouette. As the flare drifts downward, its harsh shine flickers, dims, and finally sputters out. Darkness rushes back like water filling a void. And then, almost predictably, another flare rises. The music of the night front. You stand in the trench, listening to the strange symphony of nocturnal war. There's the thump of a flare pistol, the rising hiss as the flare climbs, the soft flutter of its parachute. Then, once the light fades, the night reasserts itself with layered sounds, the distant rumble of artillery, the quiet scrape of boots on duckboards, the metallic clicking of someone checking a rifle bolt, the rustling of rats moving along trench walls, the low murmur of men whispering instructions. But the most haunting sound comes between flares, when silence settles just long enough to be heard. You listen as the wind moves across the barbed wire, a thin, eerie whistle. It sounds almost like someone calling a name. The men notice it too. Some pretend not to. Some mutter about ghosts. Some simply pull their scarves tighter. It's not superstition. It's exhaustion meeting imagination, both sharpened by the cold. Listening patrols in the dark. A sergeant taps 3 men on the shoulder, volunteers, or perhaps merely the next in rotation. They climb silently out of the trench, crawling into the darkness on their stomachs. Listening patrol. You follow their movement until the night swallows them. 3 shapes becoming shadows. Shadows merging with the ground. Out there, every sound matters. A twig snapping, a piece of wire trembling, a shovel striking frozen soil. The patrol creeps forward, stopping every few feet to listen. They carry rifles, but keep them slung. Noise is the enemy tonight. Information is the goal. The Germans send patrols too. Sometimes their shapes pass within yards of each other, both sides motionless, faces pressed into cold earth, waiting for the other to move first. When a flare rises, everyone freezes, flattening themselves into mud, hoping the light passes without revealing them. You hold your breath with them, though no one can hear you. When they return to the trench, their faces are smeared with mud, their hands pale from cold, their breaths trembling. The sergeant asks for what they heard. They answer briefly, quietly. Digging. Wire being set. Movement left of the farmhouse. Someone coughing. 2 voices speaking German. These tiny fragments of sound shape tomorrow's decisions. The night as a predator. Around midnight, the cold becomes cruel. The trench walls glisten with frozen dew. Water in helmets and tins becomes a thin skin of ice. Men huddle deeper into coats, pull scarves over noses, try to keep fingers flexible enough to hold a rifle. You watch one soldier rhythmically clench and unclench his hands, then blow warm breath into his gloves. His teeth chatter softly, not from fear, from endurance stretched too far. Another man stamps his feet on the duckboards, careful not to make too much noise. He mutters about a farm in Kent, something about warm bread, a hearth fire, the smell of coal smoke in winter. The night does this to men. It steals the present, pulls memory forward like a blanket, lets them warm themselves on things that no longer exist. But the night is also a predator. You hear a sudden shriek, a sound so raw and quick that it raises the hair on your arms. A flare bursts overhead. In its bright white glow, you see the silhouette of a man tangled in barbed wire. He must have gone out to repair a section, misjudged his footing, fallen into a snare of metal teeth. Two comrades dash forward, crouching, zigzagging, praying the enemy can't see them clearly. They pull him free, hands tearing through their gloves, wire slicing their sleeves. When they drag him back into the trench, his leg is bleeding heavily. The medic works quickly, quietly. The man's breath comes in short, pained gasps. He tries to make a joke that dissolves into a whimper. No one laughs. But no one looks away either. This is the truth of the night front. Suffering comes silently, unexpectedly, under a sky lit by artificial stars. Shellfire in the dark. Around 2 a.m., the first artillery shells begin to fall. There is no warning, no whistling descent. The fog muffles everything. A shell lands 50 yards behind the trench. A sudden roar. A tower of mud rising into the night. Clods raining down like cold rain. Then another. Closer. Then another. Closer still. The trench reacts instantly. Men crouch, hunched. Some bury their faces in their sleeves. Others look up, waiting to judge the next blast. When a shell strikes too near, the earth leaps. A violent shudder that runs through the boards, the beams, the ribs of the men themselves. Dirt showers down. Lanterns flicker. Somewhere a man screams for a medic. You watch stretcher-bearers move with quiet urgency, carrying a lantern shielded by a metal plate, navigating the trench bends with practiced strides. The night becomes a flicker of light and shadow, sound and silence, fear and resolve. When the barrage pauses, the quiet that follows feels scarier than the noise. A waiting quiet, a listening quiet, a quiet that asks, was that the end, or just the beginning? Flares as artificial moons. Around 3 a.m., the flares intensify. It feels almost choreographed. Every time the night threatens to reclaim the sky, a new flare rises, turning darkness into temporary daylight. White flares, green flares, occasionally red ones, each with its meaning, each with its signal. You watch the sky become a gallery of cruel stars. Men blink against the brightness. Shadows stretch long and thin. The ground becomes a stark map of vulnerability. Every crater is exposed, every trench lip outlined, every group of soldiers frozen in hesitant poses. The light feels endless, like dawn trapped in a loop, never arriving, never fading completely. And yet the real dawn remains far away, held at bay by cloud and cold. Dawn in a silent salient. When dawn finally comes, it doesn't rise. It seeps, grey at first, then a soft, tired blue. The flares stop. The shelling eases. The wind quiets. You stand on the fire step, watching the landscape emerge from the half-light. The wire tangled and wet. The mud frozen in strange patterns. The footprints of patrols half erased by frost. The bodies covered by sheets of canvas. The lanterns extinguished. The dugouts steaming softly. The men look older this morning, more hollowed, more deliberate in every movement. Last night has changed them, not dramatically, but subtly. A new line in the face, a new weight in the eyes, a new silence in the way they speak. Nights filled with flares are not just part of trench warfare. They are part of trench life, a rhythm of fear and endurance, a dance of light and shadow, a reminder that darkness is never fully dark, and safety is never fully safe. As the dawn settles across Ypres, the men take their first deep breaths of the morning, breaths held too long, breaths released too slowly. A new day begins, but nothing about it feels new. Chapter 7. What it meant to live in a hole. By the time the first weak rays of morning creep through the low clouds, the truth is unavoidable. The trench is no longer a temporary shelter, no longer an improvised ditch carved in panic, no longer a place men visit briefly before moving on. It is home now, not in comfort, not in warmth, not in any way the word home should mean, but in the brutal, pragmatic sense that this narrow strip of earth, muddy, cold, shivering beneath frost and artillery, is where men sleep, eat, suffer, and endure. You stand on the duckboards, feeling the mud shift beneath the planks, and you understand with quiet clarity what it means to live in a hole. The shape of daily life. Morning begins with sounds, soft, repetitive, ordinary in their monotony. The scrape of boots on boards, the hiss of water heating over small stoves, the muted clatter of cups, the sighs of men stretching stiff limbs, the distant rumble of artillery from somewhere beyond the horizon. Breakfast is not a meal of pleasure. It is a ritual of survival. Soldiers cup their hands around tin mugs of weak tea, letting the warmth seep into their fingers. Some chew hardtack softened in whatever warm liquid they can find. Others spoon cold bully beef straight from tins, grimacing at the taste but swallowing it anyway. A few men smoke, not out of habit, but out of need. Something warm entering the lungs, something to cut through the dampness of morning. As you watch them move, you notice how the trench shapes every gesture. Backs slightly hunched, steps careful and narrow, hands always aware of where the walls constrict, eyes watching for slippery spots or collapsing sides. The ground dictates posture. The walls dictate motion. The sky dictates mood. The trench dictates everything. Smell as a constant companion. To live in a trench is to live with smell. Not one smell, but layers. Wet wool, cold mud, damp earth, sweat, spilled tea, gun oil, mildew, rot, human waste, and beneath it all, the faint metallic scent of fear. The air is thick with it, so thick that after a while, you stop separating them. It becomes a single presence, a heavy, omnipresent identity of the place. Near the latrine pits, the smell intensifies, a sour, overwhelming stench that even the cold cannot suppress. Men joke about it when they can. They curse it when they must. They endure it always. Some tie scarves across their mouths. Others simply breathe shallowly. But no one escapes it. You understand, standing there, that trenches are not just physical structures. They are sensory worlds, complete in their misery. Writing letters in the mud. A quiet corner of the trench becomes a makeshift post office. A corporal hands out envelopes and thin sheets of paper. each sheet slightly damp from the humidity. Men take them with a reverence that borders on ritual. You watch them crouch on fire steps, sit on overturned ammunition boxes, lean against duckboards, careful not to let the paper touch the mud. They write by lantern light, holding the flame steady with a cupped hand, shivering so hard that the letters wobble across the page. The words come differently for each man. Dear mother, the weather is colder now. My dearest Annie, I miss your warm bread. Tell the children I am safe. I dream of home every night. I hope you received my last letter. We are holding our position. I am tired. I am tired. I am tired. The letters are small anchors cast into a storm, each one containing a piece of humanity, trying not to be lost in the mud. When the mailbag is closed for delivery to the rear, a strange silence falls. It is the silence of men who have spoken more truth on paper than they will ever speak aloud. The ritual of cleaning. In a trench, everything must be cleaned. Rifles, boots, entrenching tools, even the planks that make up the sides. Not because cleanliness is possible. It isn't. But because neglect is fatal. A dirty rifle jams. A clogged barrel misfires. A slippery step causes a fall that breaks a leg. Men scrub mud from rifles with stiff brushes, rub gun oil along the metal, wipe condensation from bolts. With pieces of torn shirt, they scrub boots with rags, dampened by cold water carried in tins. They clean bayonets slowly, methodically, as if acknowledging the grimness of the object helps them accept its purpose. And all the while, the mud returns, filling every crevice, coating every surface. The trench never stays clean, but the effort matters. The routine anchors the mind, in a place where days blur together, into an endless brown-grey smear. Conversations in a narrow world. You stand near a dugout entrance listening to the kinds of conversations that only happen in places where life is stripped to its barest essentials. Some men speak of home, the warmth of a familiar kitchen, the sound of a wife's footsteps, the laughter of children they haven't seen in months. Others speak of food, roast dinners, fresh bread, sausages frying in fat, butter melting on warm potatoes. Some speak of the future, not in grand visions, but in small hopes. A hot bath, a clean bed, a night without flares, a letter, 3 days' rest. And some speak of nothing at all, just quiet murmurs, half-thoughts, exhalations that turn to fog and dissolve into the cold air. Living in a hole compresses everything: thoughts, fears, dreams, conversation. The trench becomes the size of the world. Rats, lice, and other unwanted company. Life attracts life, even unwelcome life. You see movement along the trench walls. Rats, fat ones, bold ones, unafraid of men, unafraid of noise. They thrive in the trenches, feeding on scraps, on rubbish, on things left unspoken about. A man throws a stone at one. It dodges easily, skitters into a dugout, and reappears moments later, unbothered. The soldiers roll their eyes, joke about teaching the rats how to carry messages. But the laughter is thin. Weariness blunts everything. Lice are worse. They live in seams, in folds of wool, in the places where warmth persists. Men scratch until their arms are raw. They boil their shirts when they can. But the lice always return, tiny reminders that the trench owns them more than they own themselves. Learning to sleep in bursts. Sleep in the trench is not rest. It is surrender to exhaustion, to cold, to the demands of a body pushed too far. Men sleep in short bursts, 10 minutes here, 30 minutes there, never long enough, never deeply enough. They sleep sitting up, head against a wall, knees pulled close. They sleep in dugouts, wrapped in blankets that never fully dry. They sleep on fire steps, leaning forward, cheek against their sleeve. The trench hums at night, not with noise, but with breath, a chorus of men sleeping lightly, waiting for the next flare, the next shell, the next order. It is impossible to tell dreams from exhaustion. Everything blurs. You watch a man wake with a jolt, eyes wide, breath quick. He looks around, confused, then remembers where he is. He sighs, pulls his coat tighter, and tries again. Trench sleep is not peace. It is maintenance, just enough to keep the body alive, while the mind endures. The mind shrinks to the size of the walls. As the day fades again, and the trench fills with cold shadows, you sense how the environment shapes the men. Their world is narrow, rhythmic, predictable in its misery. The walls define their horizon. The sky defines their timing. The mud defines their steps. The cold defines their breath. The war defines everything else. You understand now what it means to live in a hole. It means surrendering the horizon. It means giving your height to the earth. It means letting the sky watch you, without offering comfort. It means becoming familiar with every curve of the trench, every knot in the boards, every stone under your boot. It means living bent, living cramped, living tired, living small. But it also means enduring, quietly, unheroically, completely. And that endurance, slow, stubborn, unremarkable in the moment, is what keeps the trench standing, day after day, night after night, in a war that will demand everything they have, and everything they can remember of home. Chapter 8. Civilians in a New World. War reshapes landscapes, but it reshapes people first. By the time the trenches harden into the earth around Ypres, the world civilians once knew has already begun to dissolve, quietly at first, then suddenly, then completely. You stand on a narrow road leading into the town, watching the slow, uneven flow of people who have not chosen to be part of this war, but cannot escape its shadow. Their carts are piled with bedding, cooking pots, wooden toys, tools, heirlooms wrapped in towels, objects pulled from homes that still stand, or homes already turned to rubble. Their footsteps crunch over frost, over broken tiles, over the splinters of their own past. These are the civilians of Ypres, caught inside the forming salient, held in place by geography, by hope, by necessity, and their world is being erased one sound at a time. A town that still breathes. Ypres should be quiet at dawn. it should wake slowly, with the smell of bread drifting from bakeries, with merchants opening shutters, with children running along cobbled streets. Instead, the morning smells of smoke, and damp stone, and distant gunpowder. The cloth hall looms above the square, its arches empty, its stone darkened by soot. Merchants no longer gather here. Refugees huddle instead, families packed into corners, blankets drawn around their shoulders. You watch a Belgian woman ladle thin soup from a pot balanced over a brazier. Her hands are cracked from cold, her eyes red from sleepless nights. Beside her, a little girl holds a small wooden doll, its paint chipped, its smile faded. The girl does not speak. Children learn silence quickly in war. They understand the language of fear without being taught. The mother glances at the distant thud of artillery, and flinches even though it is far away. This is the new rhythm of Ypres. Fear, pause, endurance, repeat. The meaning of home changes. You walk through streets that twist between tall, narrow houses, the kind built long before anyone imagined a war like this. Windows are boarded with planks pried from furniture. Doors have been reinforced with whatever wood could be found. Handwritten notices hang on walls. Cellar shelter here. Family evacuated. Check upstairs for elderly neighbor. Quiet zone. Do not shout near windows. Every cellar is now a refuge. Every attic a storehouse for valuables too heavy to carry. Every courtyard a place to distribute rations. Inside a dim cellar lit by a single lantern, you watch a family of 6 sit close together. A grandmother hums softly, not a lullaby, but a tune meant to keep her own anxiety at bay. The children eat bread gone hard from the damp. The father holds a map of the surrounding villages, tracing routes they may need to take if the front collapses. But no one speaks of leaving. Not yet. Home is home, even when the walls tremble with distant fire. The road of quiet exodus. Outside the town, the roads carry a different kind of movement, the slow, painful exodus of civilians who can no longer stay. You stand beside the road and watch them pass. Women push carts heavy with belongings. Men lead horses that stumble in exhaustion. Children walk barefoot in the mud, holding onto adults with numb fingers. Some carry only what they can hold in their arms. Some pull handcarts so overladen they creak with each step. Some pause to rest against broken walls, rubbing their faces with hands streaked in soot and tears. A boy of perhaps 12 pulls a wooden sled, loaded with sacks of grain. There is no snow. The sled grinds horribly across the mud, but it is the only thing they had. A priest walks among the families, offering blankets, helping lift heavy loads, blessing those who ask. His face is tired, lined with grief for a parish that no longer exists as it did. This road is not chaotic. It is slow, sad, inevitable, a river of lives drifting away from the place where war has chosen to settle. The sounds civilians learn to fear. Civilians learn the soundscape of war faster than soldiers. You follow a mother and her young son along a narrow alley. The boy looks up at her every time he hears a new noise. The mother listens too, her breath pausing with each sound. The townspeople have learned to interpret the noises. A distant boom means artillery landing beyond the ridges. A sharp crack means rifles at the forward line. A whistle and thud means a shell that has passed overhead. The slow grinding rumble of carts means wounded are being brought in. The metallic rattle of shovels means soldiers reinforcing positions. The low moan of wind across barbed wire means danger is close. But there is one sound no one mistakes: the scream of a shell diving toward the town. When it comes, an entire street freezes at once. Heads down, bodies still, breaths held. The shell lands somewhere nearby. A flash, a crack, a shower of broken stone. People recover, move again, continue their tasks. Fear becomes a rhythm. Survival becomes a habit. The unexpected kindness of soldiers. Despite the strain of the front, many soldiers find themselves drawn to protect the civilians, not out of duty alone, but humanity. You watch a group of British soldiers helping an elderly couple reinforce the beams of their cellar. Two French infantrymen carry a sack of potatoes to a family that has not eaten properly in days. A Belgian soldier gives his scarf to a child who cannot stop shivering. These gestures are small, but they matter. They create pockets of warmth in a world growing steadily colder. One scene lingers with you: a soldier kneeling to help a little boy tie the laces of shoes that are too big for him. The boy's hands tremble with cold. The soldier ties the knot gently, double knotting to keep them secure. The boy whispers something too softly to hear. The soldier nods, smiles faintly, and returns to his position on the line. War shrinks the world to survival, but it does not entirely erase tenderness. Shops that stay open for hope alone. Some shopkeepers refuse to leave, even as shells fall closer each day. A baker continues to make bread in a cracked oven that loses heat faster than it holds it. He sells small loaves for almost nothing, giving away the last ones each night. A seamstress keeps her door open, mending uniforms, patching blankets, sewing buttons with fingers numb from cold. A barber offers shaves, with hands that tremble each time a shell lands nearby. These acts are not practical. They are symbolic. They say, the town still lives. We still are who we were, even if everything has changed. The flares that light the night sky also illuminate these stubborn pockets of normalcy. They survive because someone insists they must. A town split in two worlds. As the chapter closes, you walk through Ypres at dusk. To one side, civilians gather around lanterns, their silhouettes fragile and tired. Children cling to adults. Mothers whisper reassurance they do not fully believe. Old men hold rosaries, fingers moving through beads with practiced desperation. To the other side, soldiers reinforce trenches, their bayonets catching the last of the light. Officers shout instructions. Medics light lamps in aid stations. Engineers hammer posts into the mud. The sound of digging blends with the sound of fear. Two worlds existing side by side, intertwined, dependent, yet fundamentally different. Civilians endure war by accident. Soldiers endure it by duty. But in Ypres, the line between the two blurs. Both wake to the same sounds. Both breathe the same smoke. Both share the same fragile dawn. You walk past a window where a candle flickers behind cracked glass, and you understand the truth. This is not just a battlefield. It is a place where ordinary life has been forced to stand shoulder to shoulder with extraordinary suffering, and everyone, soldiers and civilians alike, is learning how to live in a new, reshaped world that none of them asked for. Chapter 9. The stalemate reveals its teeth. By the time the last leaves fall from the poplars around Ypres, the shape of the war has hardened into something grim and unmistakable. No one calls it a stalemate yet, not in official reports, not in the speeches of generals, not in the letters sent home. But the men know. They feel it in their bones, and in the weight of the earth beneath their boots. This line is no longer one they will simply hold for days, before pushing forward again. It is a cage, a shield, a demand, a place where advance is impossible, and retreat is unthinkable. You stand in the dim light of an early afternoon, watching the trenches stretch across the landscape like the ribs of a buried giant, a creature settling deeper into the soil, quiet, immovable, teeth hidden beneath the mud. When movement becomes memory. In the first weeks of the war, marching filled the days, marching to reinforce, marching to pursue, marching to outflank. Boots carried armies over miles of countryside, past farms, rivers, hills, and towns. But now, the soldiers move only a few meters at a time, from dugout to firing step, from fire step to listening post, from trench to trench. Movement has become an anecdote, something warriors talk about like a faded dream. Remember when we could walk straight for an hour? One soldier murmurs as he sharpens his bayonet. The man beside him nods. His eyes have the faraway look of someone remembering a life that no longer feels like his own. You look down the length of the trench and understand that time itself has changed here. It does not move forward. It circles, folds, stagnates. Every sunrise feels like the last. Every sunset feels like a surrender to sameness. This is how stalemates begin, not with declarations, but with silence. The mud turns hostile. Around Ypres, the mud acquires a personality, and not a kind one. It pulls at boots, sucks at ankles, slides under boards, collapses walls, drinks water faster than it can be pumped out. You watch a soldier plant his foot, only to lose his balance as the mud gives way. Like a trapdoor beneath him, a corporal hauls him out by the collar, both of them gasping in cold laughter. That sounds a little too close to despair. The mud deepens every day it rains, turning the trenches into channels of thick, clinging brown. When it freezes, it becomes something else entirely. Sharp, uneven, brutal on the feet. A French engineer drives stakes into the walls to prevent collapse. A Belgian sapper shovels mud from the drainage ditch. For the 5th time that day, 2 British privates scrape clay from the duckboards, only to watch it return within minutes. The mud is constant, patient, untiring. It is the clearest sign that the land has accepted this war as part of itself. Artillery learns the static war. The boom of artillery becomes the metronome of daily life. In the distance, heavy German guns thump from the ridges, closer to the line. Smaller British and French pieces answer in uneven rhythms. Sometimes the shells pass overhead, a slow, rising whistle, ending in a hollow crump somewhere behind. Other times they fall short, and the earth leaps up in a violent eruption, a geyser of mud, a thunderclap of shrapnel. You feel the tremors in your chest, in the boards, in the marrow of your bones. Men learn to recognize the types of fire by sound alone. A long steady whistle means a high explosive round. A short cracking pop means shrapnel. A sudden roar without warning means a trench mortar, fired from too close for comfort. Whenever the shelling begins, the trenches fill with murmurs, not panic, but calculation. Too far, short of the mark, getting closer. Brace. Artillery is the teeth of the stalemate, sharp, repetitive, relentless. It shapes the land. It shapes the men. It shapes the war. No man's land becomes a graveyard of intentions. At the start, no man's land was simply a space, uncertain, dangerous, but passable. Now it is a wasteland, a scar. You peer over the parapet, careful not to expose your silhouette, and watch the desolate stretch before you. Craters filled with black water, tangles of wire half submerged, broken rifles, fallen horses, fragments of packs, shredded uniforms, and bodies. Some bodies lie twisted in positions that speak to final moments of struggle. Others rest unusually still, sunk into mud that tries to claim them entirely. A sniper's bullet cracks overhead, and you instinctively lower your head. No man's land belongs to no one, but death owns it thoroughly. The living do not venture there in daylight. Even at night, they crawl like shadows, moving inch by inch, terrified of being caught in the light of a flare. This strip of ground is the clearest testament to the nature of the stalemate, not one side pushing and the other resisting, but a frozen struggle, locked in place. Patrols without purpose. At dusk, you watch a listening patrol prepare to leave the trench, their faces smeared with mud, rifles slung across backs, knives strapped to ankles. They move quietly, almost invisibly, slipping out through a gap in the wire. The sergeant whispers instructions. Listen for digging. Look for movement. Find nothing. Come home. It's the last phrase that reveals everything. Find nothing, because often there is nothing to find. The enemy is just as stuck as they are, just as cold, just as exhausted. Yet both sides keep sending patrols, because the stalemate demands activity, without progress, movement that changes nothing, risk that brings no reward. When the patrol returns an hour later, their breaths heavy, their boots caked in new mud, they report simply, heard wire being strung, saw a lantern, no movement. The sergeant nods. It is enough, or perhaps it is all that can ever be expected. When hope becomes cautious. In the early days, men spoke of breakthroughs, of pushing the enemy back, of retaking towns, of ending the war by Christmas. Now their conversations are quieter, shorter, less certain. What if we hold through winter? One man whispers. not quite hopeful, not quite resigned. Another replies, "We'll hold." Question is, what comes after? No one answers, because they know, deep down they know, what comes after winter is another spring, another summer, another autumn, and many more years of this. This is the psychological bite of the stalemate, not fear, not despair, but the slow erosion of expectation. Hope doesn't die. It shrinks. It becomes precise, small, measured. A warm meal, a quiet night, mail from home, a dry pair of socks, one more day alive. These become the victories, the triumphs, the goals. The stalemate demands a different kind of courage, the courage to keep going, when the future looks identical to the present. The land learns silence. As night falls, a strange quiet settles across the battlefield. Not peace, never peace, just a pause in violence, the land catching its breath, the guns cooling, the men listening. You stand on the fire step, hands in your coat pockets, and hear only the soft crackle of frost forming on wire. A rat scurries along the wall. A soldier coughs in a dugout. Someone mutters a prayer. The stars are faint, their light dimmed by smoke and cloud, but still present. For a moment, no shells fall, no rifles fire, no flares rise. It is the kind of silence that feels like a question. What comes next? What breaks first? The enemy, the weather, or the men? You look across the trenches and see soldiers settling into another long, cold night. Faces pale in lantern glow, hands shaking slightly, breaths turning to mist. The stalemate has revealed its teeth, not through dramatic battles, but through quiet suffering and relentless routine. It is not a pause in the war. It is the war, the shape of it, the rhythm of it, the truth of it. Tomorrow will look the same, and the day after that, and perhaps many days after that. But for now, in this moment of stillness, you understand something essential. The trenches of Ypres are not simply lines on a map. They are a test of endurance, of patience, of faith in survival. The stalemate has closed its jaws, and the men must live inside them until the war decides otherwise. Chapter 10. The soundscape of a new war. Before the trenches took shape, war was something seen. Columns of infantry marching, cavalry charges glinting in sunlight, artillery smoke rising in distinct white puffs. But once the front settled around Ypres, war became something heard. Sound took over. Sound defined everything. Sound told men when to brace, when to move, when to hide, when to breathe. You stand in the trench at dawn, eyes adjusting to the grey, and realize the landscape around you comes alive first with noise, not cries, not commands, not battle, but a steady, layered hum, the hum of a war learning to stand still. The chorus of morning. Before the first flares rise, before the rifles crack, before the shells begin their slow conversation, the trench sings its own quiet morning song. It begins with boots scraping on duckboards, someone whispering for more tea, rations clattering in tins, a distant cough carried by the wind, the soft rustle of woolen sleeves brushing the trench wall. These are domestic noises, almost gentle, but they are layered over something deeper, a distant thrum, a low ongoing tremor, a heartbeat that does not belong to the world you once knew. It's the artillery warming up far beyond the ridge, barely audible at first, like an approaching storm. Men listen to it without looking up. They know the rhythm. They know the intervals. They know when it is close enough to fear. War has a way of teaching the ear, before it teaches the mind. The language of artillery. By mid-morning, the full orchestra of artillery arrives. You hear it before you feel it. A long, rising whistle, thin at first, then thickening as it gains speed. Men stop moving. Heads lift slightly. Eyes sharpen. They know that whistle. They know the way it curves through air. They know when it is close, and when it is not close enough. Short of us. One soldier murmurs as the shell lands 200 yards away, exploding in a fountain of mud and broken timber. The next one whistles louder. Closer. Lower. Brace. Someone says quietly. The trench stiffens. The shell lands with a violent roar, a shock wave rushing through the boards, through your boots, through your ribs. Mud falls like rain. Pebbles clatter off helmets. Someone curses softly, as if startled out of a dream rather than into danger. Then comes silence, a strange, suspended silence, until the next whistle begins. Shelling is not random noise, not to the men who live here. It is a language, a grim vocabulary of pitch, timing, distance, and expectation. They read it with their ears, the way others read text on a page. Bullets as bees, snipers as ghosts. Rifle fire has its own meaning. A distant crack is nothing to worry about. A closer crack means the sniper is adjusting. A whining buzz past the ear means you were nearly the target. Men speak of bullets as if they are insects, buzzing, whirring, stinging, passing in unpredictable swarms. You listen to the pattern. Crack, silence, crack crack, whistle, buzz. Then the faint tissage of a ricochet striking the trench wall. Every sound becomes a clue, a quick triple shot, a sniper trying to bait movement, a single distant crack at regular intervals, a scout firing at shadows in the fog, a soft plink overhead, a bullet hitting wire. The trench teaches men to identify these sounds. Faster than vision can confirm them. Fear becomes familiar. Recognition replaces panic, and the line becomes attuned to every whisper of steel in the air. The wind speaks too. On quieter days, the wind becomes the loudest voice. It hums across the wire, turning barbs into vibrating strings that sing in low, eerie tones. Sometimes it moans, as if lamenting the soil. Sometimes it whistles sharply, as though warning the men not to climb too high on the parapet. Soldiers swear the wind speaks, in languages they almost understand, that it carries messages from the other side, that it knows who is exhausted, who is afraid, who is close to breaking. You listen to it now, a long, drawn-out sigh, moving across the trenches. The wind is colder than voices, older than memory, and it has a way of filling the spaces between every other sound. In the stalemate of Ypres, the wind becomes its own kind of sentinel. It tells men when the night will be harsher, when the rain is returning, when the flares will hang lower, when the cold will bite deeper. Here, sound is prophecy. Interior noises. Inside the dugouts, the sounds change. The outside world becomes muffled, like a heartbeat heard through blankets, distant yet persistent. Inside, the noises are human, pencils scratching unevenly on damp paper, the creak of a bunk board, the faint splutter of a candle about to die, quiet snoring of men who haven't slept in days, the slow tearing of bread, whispered prayers, coats rustling as men shift their weight. You watch a man boil tea in a dented tin can, the water bubbling faintly. Another unwraps a letter, smoothing it on his knee. Someone coughs, a wet, tired cough worn thin from cold. All of it is ordinary. All of it is essential. These small noises remind the men that they are still alive, still human, still tethered to normality by threads that might snap if the trench ever falls silent. Inside these holes, sound is warmth. The terror of sudden silence. Then there are moments when the world goes quiet, not gradually, not gently, but suddenly, as if someone pressed a hand over the mouth of the battlefield. The men notice instantly. They freeze. Eyes narrow. Breath slows. Silence in trench warfare is louder than noise. It means the enemy is preparing something, or listening, or moving, or thinking. You feel the tension in the air, a taut string stretched across the trench. No one speaks. No one clears their throat. No one counts the seconds, though everyone is counting them internally. This silence is not peace. It is potential. It is threat. It is the pause before a shell, before a flare, before a sudden rush of fire from a machine gun hidden in the fog. Silence has its own teeth, sharper than artillery, sharper than bullets. The men fear the quiet as much as they fear the noise. The night's cracked whisper. Night brings its own vocabulary. You stand on the fire step as darkness settles. Across the salient like a heavy blanket. In the distance, a flare pistol snaps. Then a soft hiss as it climbs. Then the harsh bloom of white light. Below it, shadows move. Rats scurry. Men hold their breath. A whisper travels down the trench. Movement left. No, just wire. Hold steady. The night amplifies everything. Boots sinking into mud. The soft click of a rifle safety. The metallic rattle of gear being adjusted. A man swallowing nervously. The faintest gasp of cold air entering a throat. You watch a listening patrol climb out. Their breaths shallow. Their movements silent. Their senses sharpened to the edge of human ability. When they return, mud dripping from their sleeves, they speak in hushed tones. Digging on their side, could be a sap. Heard voices, 2 or 3. Every sound becomes intelligence. Every whisper becomes a report. Every footstep becomes a story. The night is not darkness. It is listening. the sound that stays after all others fade. With time, the men of Ypres learn to live inside the war's soundscape. They read artillery. They predict sniper fire. They measure wind. They interpret silence. They navigate the night by sound alone. But one noise remains long after others fade, a noise that marks the heart of the stalemate, the rhythmic scraping of shovels, biting into earth, digging, always digging, deepening trenches, repairing walls, carving new dugouts, extending communication lines, reinforcing fire steps. Scrape, heave, thud, again, again, again. The sound repeats into the dusk, into the night, into the early hours of morning. It is not the noise of battle. It is the noise of endurance. The trenches are being built, not with glory, but with rhythm, a slow, persistent rhythm that becomes the heartbeat of the front. You stand in the cold, listening to the unending scrape of shovels, and you understand. The men of Ypres do not live by what they see. They live by what they hear. The soundscape is the war, its warning, its comfort, its terror, its truth. And in the quiet moments between noises, in the fragile spaces where breath becomes mist, you hear the deepest truth of all. This war is no longer moving. It is listening, waiting, settling into the earth, with the weight of a world that cannot change, until something, somewhere, breaks the rhythm. Chapter 11. Learning the logic of the line. By the time frost hardens the edges of the Ypres trenches, the men have begun to acquire something no manual ever taught them, a quiet, instinctive mastery of the new kind of war they are trapped inside. No one calls it training. No one calls it skill. But the trenches demand a sort of intelligence, a map you learn with your hands, your ears, your breath, your nerves, your memories of danger. What emerges is not heroic. It is not strategic brilliance. It is survival, learned inch by inch, night by night, shovel stroke by shovel stroke. You stand with them on a dim morning and understand. They are learning the logic of the line. Reading the ground like a second language. The first lesson comes from the earth itself. The men learn where the mud swallows boots, and where it merely stains them. They learn which parts of the trench flood after rain, which sections collapse after frost, which corners hide rats, which boards wobble dangerously. A private from Yorkshire taps the duckboards with his toe. "They'll go," he murmurs. And he's right. 2 hours later they tilt violently as water rises beneath them. Another man studies the trench walls. Needs bracing. Before dusk, or she'll slide. They are not engineers by trade, but the line makes engineers out of them. Even the ground beyond the trench becomes familiar. The slight dip that always fills with mist. The patch of wire that never stays upright. The crater that hides shadows in a specific shape. The low fold of earth where snipers aim in the morning sun. To survive here is to map the land so deeply. You feel its changes before you see them. The art of rotations. No one can live permanently on the fire step. The men learn the rhythm of rotations, a delicate, exhausting cycle that keeps the line functioning. 2 hours on watch, 4 hours in reserve, 8 hours repairing, 12 hours attempting to rest. Then back again. Always back again. Rotations are planned. But the front line shifts constantly. A shell collapses a trench wall. A listening post needs reinforcing. A man falls sick. A rat chews through cable. So rotations become improvisations. A sergeant taps 2 men awake. Up. We need you on the line. No explanation. No complaint. The logic is simple. The line never sleeps. Therefore, the men cannot truly sleep either. Rest becomes a thing measured in fragments, in moments, in breaths. They learn to sleep lightly. One ear always open. One hand always near their gear. One part of their mind always awake. Just enough to hear danger. The science of wire and walls. Trenches do not hold themselves up. The men learn to reinforce walls. With broken doors scavenged from ruins. With beams from barns. With planks ripped from houses, whose owners fled in the night. Every night, the trench shifts. Every morning, the men correct it. The logic of reinforcement becomes instinct. If the wall bulges, pack it with sandbags. If the sandbags freeze, cover them with sacking. If the sacking gets wet, replace it before dawn. If the trench lip collapses, build a firing step from scrap timber. If the wire sags, tighten it before the next shelling. If the wire snaps, repair it under darkness. You watch a corporal show a young private how to anchor wire to iron stakes. Not too tight, he says softly. Give it a bit of play. Stops it snapping with frost. The private nods. He ties the wire again. Better. This is trench knowledge. Quiet, practical, born from necessity. The line is both fragile and endlessly resilient, because the men who hold it have learned to read its needs. Learning to listen to the enemy. Across no man's land, the German trenches lie like mirror images of their own, parallel worlds sharing the same logic, and the men begin to understand the rhythms of the other side. They learn the sound of German shovels, a lower scrape, a slower tempo. They learn the pattern of German flares, how green means caution, how white means illumination, how red means a signal that something is about to change. They learn that Germans often dig at night, sing softly before dawn, and move supplies when fog covers the field. One soldier presses his ear to the ground. Digging, he whispers. Close. Maybe a sap. The sergeant nods. Orders a counter-listening post. The logic of the line is not defensive alone. It is preventative. Both sides listen. Both sides calculate. Both sides breathe in sync. Without ever meeting, the line becomes a shared nervous system. Two armies interpreting vibrations. In the same earth. Reading the sky, the light, and the air. The men become meteorologists, whether they want to or not. Clouds dictate shell visibility. Moonlight dictates sniper risk. Fog dictates patrol success or failure. Rain dictates trench stability. Wind dictates whether poison gas will drift. When the war escalates. In months to come, a sergeant watches the sky at dusk. Snow tonight, he murmurs. And he is right. A thin dusting appears by dawn. Another soldier points to a low band of cloud. No shelling for an hour. Sound won't carry. He is also right. The trench teaches patience, observation, interpretation. To survive here is to read the sky, as though it were a second command structure. The air carries messages, smoke drifting from a cooking fire, a faint chemical scent from distant shells, the cold shift before a barrage. Nothing is random. Everything is instruction. The ritual of stand to. Twice each day, before sunrise, and just before sunset, the entire line performs the ritual of stand to. Rifles loaded, positions manned, eyes scanning the horizon, bodies silent, still, waiting. This ritual comes from older wars, from eras of cavalry charges and sudden dawn attacks. But even here, in static trenches, the logic remains. Dawn and dusk are when the light confuses, when shapes deceive, when men see movement where there is none, and fail to see it where it matters. You stand with them during stand to, feeling the cold seep into fingers, that grip rifles with disciplined calm. For half an hour. No one speaks. Every breath is visible. Every heartbeat feels louder than footsteps. And then, slowly, the line exhales. The ritual ends. The day resumes. The men return to tasks, as though they hadn't just stared death in the face. In perfect silence. The logic of the line is this. Anticipate everything. Trust nothing. Stay ready. Teaching the newcomers. Replacements arrive at Ypres, wide-eyed and far too clean. Their boots are still stiff. Their coats still smell of fresh wool. Their hands have not yet shaped the grooves of equipment, and the veterans teach them, quietly, gently, firmly. Don't lean on the wall. It will collapse. Don't sleep too deep. You won't wake fast enough. Don't stand in silhouette at night. Don't light a cigarette near the front. Don't put your pack down. Rats will find it. Don't use that dugout. It floods. Don't trust the ground. Check it first. Don't think too much at night. And then, the most important lesson. Stay small. Stay quiet. Stay alive. You watch the newcomers absorb these truths. Their faces pale. Their shoulders tense. Their minds overwhelmed. But within days, they move like the veterans. Shoulders low. Steps careful. Ears alert. Bodies attuned to the pulse of the line. The trench becomes a teacher. The men become its students. Understanding the shape of survival. By the time the chapter closes, you stand on a slight rise behind the trench, watching the landscape settle into dusk. The men move with an efficiency unthinkable only weeks earlier. One repairs wire as another guards him. Two carry planks to reinforce a wall. A pair of stretcher-bearers rest after a long night. A signalman tests cable connections. Scouts prepare for listening duty. There is no heroism in these actions, no dramatic flourish, no moment that will enter textbooks. But they matter. They matter more than anything else, because the logic of the line is simple. If the trench stands, the men stand. If the men stand, the line stands. This war is no longer a dance of attack and counterattack. It is a quiet, unending negotiation between earth, weather, fear, and the men who endure them. You watch them work in the fading light, their breath forming pale ghosts in the cold air, and you understand the final truth. The trenches are not merely held by force. They are held by knowledge, by instinct, by adaptation, by the quiet, learned intelligence of thousands of men who came here as soldiers and became something else, caretakers of a line that will define the war. The logic of the line is not written in orders. It is written in footsteps, shovels, breath, mud, and memory, and it will guide them through every long night and every frozen dawn to come. Epilogue. Stillness that feels endless. The frost has thickened overnight. You see it before you feel it. A pale shimmer across the mud, a glaze on the duckboards, a thin layer of white on the wire that looks almost delicate, until the light hits it and reveals the cold beneath. The guns are quiet for the moment. The wind is still. Even the ravens perched on the ruined farmhouse seem hesitant to call. For the first time in days, you sense a strange gentleness in the landscape, not peace, not safety, but a pause large enough to breathe inside. You walk slowly along the trench, boots crunching softly where the frost has stiffened the earth. The men you pass speak in low voices, or not at all. Their movements are deliberate, careful, as if they fear the morning might shatter if they disturb it too suddenly. This stillness feels unusual, precious, and somehow endless. Yet you know, deep down, that nothing in war lasts. Not silence, not fear, not stillness, not even the shape of the front. But for now, the moment holds. The landscape remembers. You climb a slight rise just behind the trench, one of the low mounds of earth thrown up by weeks of digging. From here, the battlefield spreads before you, in muted colors, brown, gray, white, a palette washed clean, except for the darkest shadows in the craters. The trees are stripped bare, the fences shattered, the farmhouses reduced to angular silhouettes, but the shape of the line, the trenches stretching across the fields like the seams of a giant, frozen tapestry, is unmistakable. It looks immovable, eternal, as if it has always been there, and will always remain. This is the quiet deception of the stalemate, that the world seems fixed, even while it slowly fractures beneath the surface. The land wears the war now. It carries the imprint of boots, the bruising of artillery, the scars of desperation, and somewhere beneath the frost, the earth remembers the warmth of men who fell in the night, and now lie still beneath thin layers of clay. You feel the weight of that memory settle across your shoulders, like the cold air itself. Small rituals in a fractured morning. Down in the trench, a soldier lights a cigarette with cupped hands. The smoke rises in a thin blue thread, twisting gently in the cold air, before disappearing. Another man pours tea from a tin mug into another soldier's hands, warming them for a moment before they drink. Two stretcher-bearers share a quiet joke, the kind only men who have seen too much suffering can tell without breaking. A young private rewrites a letter, carefully folding the page so it doesn't smudge, checking each word, as if truth might be held together. by neat handwriting. None of these moments are heroic. None of them will appear in histories, or memorials, or speeches, but they are the heartbeat of survival. War is not fought only in battles. It is fought in the slow accumulation of ordinary gestures, in extraordinary circumstances, in tea shared, in hands warmed, in letters written, in boots cleaned, in the quiet decision to keep breathing, when breathing feels like work. The stillness of the morning reveals these rituals for what they are: acts of endurance, acts of humanity, acts of defiance against the cold, and the mud, and the endlessness of it all. The thought that echoes. As you walk along the trench, you feel a thought rising in you, soft at first, then clearer. How long will this last? The men wonder it too, though few say it aloud, not because they fear the answer, but because the answer does not exist. The war has slowed to the pace of seasons. Victory no longer looks like movement. It looks like remaining upright, remaining warm, remaining alive. The stalemate does not roar. It whispers. It presses gently, relentlessly, eroding certainty. Hour by hour, you watch a soldier stare across no man's land, eyes fixed on a point no one else can see. He is not looking for the enemy. He is looking for the horizon, for a sign that something beyond this trench is still moving. But the horizon offers nothing, only fog, only frost, only the faint silhouettes of wire, and the soft sinking of the earth under cold. The stillness feels endless, because the men cannot yet imagine an end to the shape the war has taken. Not here, not now, not in the mud of Ypres. A gentle truth. As the morning light grows stronger, you feel a curious warmth despite the temperature, a kind of quiet acceptance. The trenches carved here are more than scars, more than defenses, more than symbols of stagnation. They are witnesses, witnesses to the courage that does not shout, does not charge, does not blaze through smoke. The courage here is quiet, measured in hours, in breath, in endurance, measured in the willingness to rise each morning in a place that offers so little comfort and so much danger, measured in the decision to keep living in a hole for the sake of those beside you, and somehow, in this frozen stillness, that truth feels larger than the trenches themselves. The stillness breaks, but softly. Eventually, as all things do, the moment shifts. Somewhere to the east, a shell lands, not close, not significant, but enough to remind the men that the pause was temporary. They resume their tasks. They adjust rifles. They clear frost from metal. They tighten scarves. They prepare for another day that will look much like the last. But the stillness has left something behind, a faint echo, a fragile understanding, a recognition of how life persists, even in places that feel suspended outside time. You take a final look across the frost-covered fields, feeling the chill seep into your bones, and you know, the war here has settled. The stalemate is real, and the trenches of Ypres will define not just this day, but many days to come. Stillness is not peace. but it is a moment to breathe, a moment to see clearly, a moment to understand the vast quiet courage of those who endured. And when you inhale the cold air once more, you carry that understanding with you, softly, carefully, as though it might break, if held too tightly. You've been walking through the first season of a war that will change the world, a war that has already changed the land, a war that asks more of the human spirit than anyone imagined possible. And now, quietly, the chapter closes. You're listening to echoes of war,